Well, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to talk about where college football is right now with the transfer portal inexplicably open during all these bowl games, during the playoff games. You've got Penn State's backup quarterback opting to go to the transfer portal. He's a decent quarterback. He might be needed if there were to be an injury. And it's just all totally backwards. And I think there's a lot of problems, but the transfer portal is such a total mess at this point, just in terms of the free reign on the players being able to transfer. I know this has been talked about a lot, it's been expressed, but it is like every single player at the end of every year is virtually a free agent and can be bid on by anyone. The national letter of intent is meaningless. You even had players, if they sign with a school, they sign their letter and then the coach leaves, they can get out of that and enter the portal the same year of their recruiting class. So like they could be class of 2025. They sign their national letter of intent, the coach leaves, and then they could be in the portal before even playing a game of college. It's so ridiculous, and you're seeing a lot of these schools lose players, and just mainly because they're trying to go to the highest bidder, and it just erodes the whole idea and the whole structure of college football, and also the development. I mean, you take a look at a school like Oregon, who didn't develop Dylan Gabriel. You could say they, helped with Bo Nix, but Bo Nix still had 3 years at Auburn or whatever. Dylan Gabriel's on like his 6th year, and then we'll see what they do next year. They might get another QB. There's talk of Quinn Ewers, possibly if he decides to stay in college. Arch Manning's going to be next up at Texas. Maybe they take him. So these teams aren't even developing players. They're just picking quarterbacks. It's almost like the other schools are a feeder system, like a minor league system of sorts, to where the young quarterbacks come in, they go through the motions, they struggle, they get experience, and then they go to the bigger schools. This is just such a mess. And you've got Marshall having to opt out of the Independence Bowl versus Army with the portal exodus. Louisiana Tech has to fill in. This is like the COVID thing when teams couldn't play because of the pandemic and stuff like that. But this is even worse because this is just Marshall firing their head coach. They were 10-3. And then a bunch of the players, like 40 players or whatever, enter the transfer portal. Or excuse me, it says 25 players to the portal since their coaching change. I mean, I don't even know what to say about this. And this here, it is fixable because you can just change when players can enter the portal. They're going to have to wait. And I think it's going to be the other problem is there's just no leadership within college football, but they're going to have to change it to where, after all of the bowl games, after the postseason, players can enter the portal. That's an obvious change. But I think there needs to be a lot more done on top of that. And that doesn't even take into account everything that's going on in terms of the NIL, how rampant it is. Does it get to the point where the players are employees? It seems like it has to be something like that. And then the contracts get disclosed. And there's going to be contracts with these players because the players are free agents every single year. There's zero continuity. Now, some of the players are going to stay with their school. I get it. But even like, there's a 5-star Alabama cornerback who is from the state, and now he's in the portal. Ole Miss offered him $1 million. It's not good for the sport. And so this is really going to turn into something, because right now it's like a fringe pro league, but they're not fully into it. Once they get the whole contracts and treating the players as employees, I think that's going to be the end. And it's unfortunate, but it's what's going to have to happen. It's like they're 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and it's creating this really bad system to where the NIL is so rampant, nobody knows who's getting paid, how they're getting paid, and you've got, some teams shilling out, like, I know Texas Tech had a receiver, and here it is right here, Micah Hudson, who was a 5-star receiver. I think he was from in-state, from Texas, and they were able to keep him home, and it was this huge thing. They gave him $700K minimum wire up front for 1 year to sign immediately. So that was just to sign. Right, he could have transferred. He could have just checked out. And by the way, this kid is transferring. That's why they're showing this. This was his deal. Separate NIL deal for 3 cars for family members, and they're starting to do that to sign immediately. So this is just signing immediately. The family gets 3 cars. He gets $700K. And that's another thing that happened with a big-time offensive tackle, David Sanders Jr., I think, to where Tennessee gave him his family a bunch of benefits, things like that's happening all over the sport. It's not just the player. It's also the family. It's just totally rampant. It's totally out of control. Personal driver with Cadillac SUV for him to and from practice, family hotel. And this kid ended up with 8 catches for 123 yards, no touchdowns. He's in the portal. I mean, what are we doing? This is it just doesn't make any sense. Penn State's backup quarterback, who, if something happens to Drew Eller, by the way, I believe is staying, which is really big for Penn State. I mean, although you would think if he has a crazy playoff run with his, him being as big as he is, you would think that, that's a big boy quarterback. That's somebody who's physical. He has a good playoff run. He shows the ability to throw the ball. He might be a top 5, top 10 pick. So bearing a really nice playoff run by Penn State, I think he probably will come back, and that's why their backup is in the portal. But it's a big issue because imagine Eller gets hurt. This kid can play. He's played in mop-up duty, and it's like, what are we doing? Penn State they're very likely going to win 2 games. They're going to be favorites. They're favorites against SMU at home. They're probably going to be favored over Boise State. This is just such a mess. It's a mess, and there's just no leadership. College football playoff expansion to 14 teams in 2026 is not still on the table. Yeah, this is another thing that I discussed. I think for college football, the obvious solutions right now is to change the transfer portal windows. Obviously, it has to be changed till after the season ends. So the window, I think, would be like the first Monday after, or I guess the national title is always on a Monday. So I would say Tuesday, the Tuesday after the national title, and to be this whole big thing. It would be a little bit crazy. I think you have to restrict somehow, and I know people are going to hate this because a lot of people are for player empowerment, but I think people are starting to turn back on that because it's gotten so out of control, the idea of player empowerment. I think you have to do something to restrict these kids from transferring every year, whether it's you can transfer once, no penalty, and then the second time you got to sit out. I understand it creates problems because coaches do promise these players things and then they leave the players dry and they go off to better pastures and get better deals with other schools. So the coach could be recruiting a player throughout 2 years of the player's high school's career. He could promise him everything. Coach gets a better offer. When the kid's a freshman, he leaves, the kid's screwed. So that's why they think, I mean, you could put stipulations in to say, hey, if your coach leaves, you could transfer and there's no penalty. But this idea to where I think some of these players are on their 4th team, and also the COVID year is like still around. Like some of these, but it's not even a COVID year anymore. These kids just randomly spawn in with like 5 years of eligibility. Like Dylan Gabriel's on like year number 6, but these kids, like, wait, how do you get 6 years and you've played every single year? Where are these years coming from? Because first it was 5 years, you get the extra year because of the pandemic, but the pandemic it's 2020, it's the 2020 season. I think we're finally done with that. I think this is the last year of that. Although who knows? There'll probably be kids that spawn in with like their in like their 8th year next year. I understand the exemption with you're injured, you can get another year. But some of these kids, like, they play like 5 years and they get a 6th year. Like the dude's played for 5 years. Where is the eligibility coming from? Is it just made out of thin air? So I think, listen, there's things that you can do. And then when it comes to the NIL situation, it's going to have to be public, just like a pro league. That's the only solution at this point. Because, right, and like, do you have a salary cap, things like that? MLB doesn't have a salary cap, NFL and NBA do, but it's especially manipulated in the NFL with deferred money and everything like that. I don't even know how that would work, honestly. In terms of it's just such a mess. Like, the entire thing. You could make it better, I guess, because right now, a lot of these, sometimes it doesn't work out. You look at Texas A&M, they paid a bunch of kids, they had no culture. All those kids enter the portal. You can lose kids just as easy as you can gain them. But I think Oregon is really gaming the system in terms of most of their kids, like most of their starters are all transfer portal players. Nobody really talks about it, but most of them are. Their quarterbacks are all, they're transfers. They let them go to other schools, start for a few years. We don't want you at the start of your career. We don't want to sit through your mistakes. We'll just take you when you're a senior or a junior. You've already thrown a ton of passes in college. You've got the experience. That's fine. So it's like they use smaller schools as feeder systems, and the kid can transfer, no penalty. Look at Dylan Gabriel transferring twice, no penalty, playing in his 6th year. Nothing against the kid. If you can do it, that it is what it is. But it's like, this is really what college football has turned into. It's crazy. But when it comes to this playoff, the reason this expansion would happen in 2026, I think is probably just for more inventory. It would create 2 more games because you'd be expanding the playoff by 2 teams. And then it would also create, on top of that, actually, it might create even more games because I think you'd only have 2 teams with a bye. It might create 4 more games. But on top of that, you would potentially have a system to where there would be 3 auto qualifiers or 4 auto qualifiers for the Big Ten and the SEC. And those teams, there'd be multiple teams playing on conference championship weekend. And that would add more inventory for the TV deals and stuff, and they're just trying to get more inventory. And this would be the SEC if it goes to 14 teams, switching to a 9-game conference schedule, I would imagine, because I think that's going to happen at some point. ESPN's going to want it. They're going to want more inventory. And that the 14 team where they get auto qualifiers anyways, they really don't have any problem that you're not going to be penalized for playing harder schedules at that point, because you're going to get multiple teams in. And 14 teams, you could lose 3 games and get in very easily. With 14 teams, imagine they expand it to 16 teams and no one gets first round buys, and you're talking about 1v16, 2v15, 3v14, something like that. That is a legit like mini March Madness, because that's like a region of March Madness, because there's 16 teams in each region. So that's something that they might do if they go to 16 teams where no one gets buys and there's even more inventory. I don't know. There's a lot that they can do. But I think this is mainly in part because there's this dialogue, the expansion. The conference championship games are meaningless. You could actually be hurt by winning it, which you look at Oregon, there's an argument to be made. And so they want the conference championship games to matter. So that's why they're saying there's going to be multiple games on conference championship Sunday. There's going to be one conference championship game and then 2 other games that are going to be for seeding for the Big Ten and the SEC. And also maybe the ACC if they give the ACC 2 auto qualifiers. And they're also talking about giving the Big 12 2 auto qualifiers as well. And I'm guessing the group of 5 would get 1 still. So we'll see what happens. The big problem right now, the most obvious fix, and this will be fixed. It has to be, just based off of the Penn State situation. Marshall going 10-3, not being able to field a team. Like that just shows you a total lack of leadership within the NCAA. This has been talked about for years now. Everyone saw this coming, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And NIL keeps getting more off the rails. And kids with the portal, there's just no restrictions. They're on like their 4th team in 4 years. These are 5-star players. They go to a team. They have a 1 bad year where they sit on the bench. They enter their name into the portal. It's a total open market. They get more offers. You got players being offered $700K up front just to sign if you've got a desperate team like Texas Tech, and then the kid after a year is gone after having like 100 total yards. I mean, what an absolute joke college football is right now, with 0 leadership. And I mean, there are obvious things you can do, not for the NIL. For the NIL, it's like, well, it's going to be a pro league where you disclose things, and players are going to have to sign three-year deals or what, like that's what it's going to turn into. Because otherwise, these kids are just going to keep entering the portal every single year. And it's not every player is going to do that. There's a lot of stud players who I'm sure they got a decent enough NIL deal to where maybe they could get slightly more elsewhere, but there's really not a reason to do it if you're at a good enough school, if you're at an Ohio State, if you're at a Georgia. You're not going to really need to enter. Although we've seen like with Bama, players enter. I mean, when you lose a coach, it's even 10 times worse now when you lose a coach, because the transfer portal, it allows these kids to just enter, transfer anywhere. No penalty, although they already have no penalty, I feel like, no matter what. And originally the transfer portal was kind of like, okay, it's all the players. The good teams are really not going to be hurt by it. It could actually help them in terms of roster turnover by losing like dead scholarships. Kids that were never really going to start, maybe they're sophomores, they're just taking up a scholarship. It could help them because they get to transfer and play like at a lower tier school and start with no penalty. And it helps the team out because the team loses that scholarship. They shed the scholarship, so it opens up for their next recruiting class. But the problem now is it's just a total open market. So even the really good teams, their 5-star players after a year or 2 are starting to look around in cases. And that's what happened with Alabama. And I think it's going to happen elsewhere, to where even if these players stay, they're probably going to shop and they're going to say, hey, listen, I just got offered this. You're going to have to match this or do something in terms of the NIL. And it's just all behind the scenes. So it is a total mess. It is what it is, and there's just no leadership. I do think the playoff will be expanding, and the obvious fix that needs to happen, this is like an ASAP, executive order of college football, change the transfer portal window because the kids think they missed their opportunity. So even playoff teams, their backups, they're like, we want to play, but we need to go to the portal to be able to get to a school before other kids do. We don't want to miss our opportunity at a school, especially quarterbacks trying to find a potential place where they could start. Because you got a bunch of other kids who didn't make the playoff entering the portal, a bunch of QBs getting offered things. So change when the portal opens until right after the season. It'll be a whole big thing. And I mean, it would be a mess. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, what else other option is there? You can't have this thing where during the season, the most important part of the season, these kids are having to leave. And you can say, well, that's bad. They should stay. but it is their future, and a lot of these kids are backups and they want to start, and so they want to go to the best place where they can actually start rather than being a backup in a playoff game, although it's just so backwards right now in how this is done. So there's going to be an expansion, I would imagine. They're going to try and make the conference championship weekend even more meaningful with more inventory. The SEC is going to go to 9 games. The playoff is going to expand to 14, maybe 16 teams. I would probably want it to go to 16, honestly. 2 teams getting a bye the way it staggers is kind of dumb. So you might as well just go all in with 16 teams, and then the 1 seed faces the 16. But even that now you're getting to the point where it's, I mean, is that really what we want college football to be? Because at least with the 12 team, it's still structured a little bit better to where if you get a bye, you only have to win 3 games. Now you would have to win 4 games, and that's a lot of football. That is a lot of, and now you're adding also more games to conference championship weekend as well. It'll be, I mean, these kids are getting paid, but that's a whole nother issue with NIL. So listen, college football right now, it's not in a very good place. I still think, you compare it to like the NBA. The NBA is dealing with a terrible ratings problem. College football is really not having that issue. College football's issue is not the on-field product. It's more so the behind-the-scenes stuff, the NIL, and the NCAA not really having any power to control any of this or regulate any of it, and everything's just crazy, and everyone's just running wild. And again, just a major problem with this type of structure is teams being treated as feeder schools for a bigger dog, like for Oregon. It's there's just no development. They don't need to develop anything. The other schools develop for them, and then the player comes more polished, and then they have other parts around him that makes him even better. So I mean, that's what instant transfers are. You start at a smaller school, you get polished, you throw your interceptions, you learn, and then you'll be polished up for the bigger schools. And it's like, is that really what we want college football to be? But that's what it is with instant transfers. So listen, it is what it is. We'll have to see how this whole thing shakes out with NIL. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.